Right. Call to order the board equalization meeting for June 9th, 8:30 a.m. We'll start with a roll call and show the forum, and then Stephen Mayo representing the Scottsville district.
My name is Bob Beard, representing Samuel Miller. Will Howard, Jack Jewett District.
David Mitchell, Whitehall.
Dave Norfolk, Ravenna.
Frank Friedman, Ryle.
Very good. So we have a forum then. And did anyone have questions or revisions to the minutes from last month or last meeting? Okay, is there a motion with respect to those minutes?
I move we accept the minutes as presented.
Second. All in favor of the motion to accept the minutes as prepared by the assessor's office?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, motion passes and those minutes are adopted as the official minutes. And the first application would be Mr. Wu, and to application number 9, address 6121 Jones Gap Road, Jose, Virginia 22932. I understand from staff's representation that the property owner has called in this morning and advised of his intention to withdraw the application. Okay. That's the case. Suppose is there a motion to accept the withdrawal?
So moved.
All right, is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and application number 9 is withdrawn, and the assessor's assessment for the remaining procedural fund. Now understand there's a lengthy gap in the schedule until 10:10, is that 10:40? 10:40. So in that case, I would move that we have an official recess so that we can whatever it is that we want us to do for the next 2 hours.
In a request that we just return at 10:30.
Okay, yeah, certainly. So then I move that we recess until the 10:30. Is there a second?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, passes unanimously, and this meeting is adjourned at 8:36 a.m. Ready? We're calling to order the tonight's equalization meeting here at 10:42 a.m. First applicant is today. Application number 5. And 56. Oh, yes, here it is. Application number 56. Down from virtual.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, board members, for your time. The property under appeal today.
Oh, could we swear you in very quickly?
Oh, absolutely.
Could you raise your hand and anyone who's going to give testimony today? You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony of the oral documentary which you will have here's that and go ahead.
Property under appeal today is owned by Fashion Square Assets. It is a department store, part of a bigger mall. And this property, as of the date of valuation, is currently 33% occupied. This property was purchased back in 2020 for around $46 a square foot. And ever since It's had chronic vacancy problems. And currently it's advertised as being up for lease at $15 per square foot. The current assessment, I believe, it is on the cost approach and not on the income approach, which generally is not recommended by the IAAO for income producing properties. Attached within the packet is the rent roll as of 1/1/2025. And also with the rent roll are the annual operating statements for financial years 23 and 24. And on the second page of the appeal packet, we have 3 approaches to income valuation. The first 2 for years 23 and 24, that is the least fee income valuation. And we can see that with the current income and the expenses, that value is very low, and that is not our requested value for today. In the third column, what we did here is the income approach with discount for lease up, and we value the property as if fully occupied and stabilized. We use the current rent that the property owners are currently advertising at $15 per square foot. And you can see that the income value, I believe, is around 11 million. But that is before the costs or discount for lease up. And once the discount for lease up costs are applied, it's around 7,500,000. That is our requested value for today. And if you look on the page right after the second page, we show our discount for lease up calculations there. Generally speaking, it is a big box property. So the tenants that this property can lease, they have to be a big box retailer. So that would effectively cancel out smaller tenants, and the smaller tenants for retail spaces can pay higher rent per square foot. They're more flexible. And along with the appeal packet, I have a peer property summary. I have isolated comparable properties within driving distance in the subject. The first property, they have a advertised triple net rent per square foot of $20. And this property is located on 357 Hillsdale Drive. It's about a mile away from the subject. The building that it's currently attached to is about double the size at 170,032 square feet. This property, however, in terms of occupancy, is doing much better than the subject properties. If we look on the peer properties report and flip to page 3, we can see the subject property on 1639 Rio Road. And here it's highlighted in blue. It says the triple net estimated rent per square foot is between $25 and $30, but it also notes that it's estimated. That is not the advertised lease rent for this property. Excuse me. I apologize. I'm on the peer report. I'm on page 3. No, it was not. It's an additional item today. I do not. I anticipated 5 copies, and I brought 1 extra. I thought maybe we were getting that.
You need this to finish?
I should be. All right. There's yes. 357 Hillsdale Drive. They're requesting about $20 per square foot triple net. This is higher than the requested $15 per square foot of the subject property. I believe it's either modified gross or triple net is what the property owner is requesting. And if we flip 2 pages on the peer report, when you go to the peer property details, right here, it has a direct comparison of the rents of the comparable properties and the subject properties. And here, under the subject column, we can see that the vacancy percentage is 66.7%. Their asking rent is $15 per square foot, triple net. And compared to 357 Hillsdale Drive, they're requesting about $20 per square foot. And right under that is the Pantups Shopping Center. And they're asking around $19 per square foot triple net. And their vacancy is only 22%. So the subject is, in terms of vacancy, not as competitive compared to its peers. This is a distressed property. And today we are requesting a reduction on the current assessment until the subject property can be stabilized and leased up and valued on the market. And that's all.
That's his office, ready?
Yes. So, in that, if started, I do want to comment. The purpose of this property from Jason's opinion was definitely distressed. So I think that's the appropriate to use that word in this setting. So when we currently purchased it from them, it was at auction. And that it's like the purchase price was based on the distressed situation. And that was going to be. I also point out that we are requesting in the end of this analysis of what Deb will present to you, an increase in the assessment from 9,558,000 to I provided each of you a copy of the state code that kind of restricts us from asking for an increase, except in a couple of situations. So in case we have to deal with that question, I provided that conversation. But that was going to go through the explanation of why people just probably asking based on.
I'd like to address the income approach of the applicant first. The existing lease with the county is full service, and they're representing a full service lease at $15.30 a square foot, I believe. However, this is a modified gross lease, and we're responsible for, as the county, responsible for all utilities, repairs and maintenance, routine maintenance of the MEP up to $2,500, as well as an annual HVAC maintenance contract, the snow plowing, the janitorial, the trash, any increase in the landlord's insurance premiums as a result of use or occupancy. So it's definitely not a service lease. The tenant expenses based on the initial operational budget for the county were $3.24 per square foot estimated. In addition to the county provided the entire outfit at a cost of $3,034,000, and that's shown on the building permits on page 3 of our documentation. Based on the first initial term of 10 years of this lease, that would straight line an additional $9.44 per square foot to the lease. Had the landlord paid for it would be included in the lease, but because we paid for them, it's not included in the lease. Therefore, the rent is lower, and capping that into perpetuity makes the value lower for purposes of discussion. So to get to a full service lease, you would have to take the $14.30 square foot plus the $3.24 of operational costs and add an additional $9.44 to the rent, which would equate to $25.73 a square foot. And that should be the starting point for the income approach for that portion of the property if you were to do the income approach. Then the applicant applied a full service rental rate of $14.30 per square foot to the vacant space. The vacant space is demised currently as the same department store that nothing has changed since JCPenney. So we looked at rents in the market, and on page 5, I have 5 residential units. For large box spaces, and the median base rent for that was $13.71, and the median recovery was $2.36. So essentially, rent full service for the vacant space would be $16 a square foot using the median. Also, using a retail cap rate for the entire project is not applicable to this, because this is no longer just a retail space. This is vacant retail space of 64,970 square feet, and service garage and office of 32,140 square feet. So one of the reasons why we didn't use the income approach is because the cap rate for a retail property would not be applicable, nor would it be credible for this. That is why we fell to the cost approach, to get to the fee simple value of the property. And we developed the cost approach using our marshal valuation service cost methodology. We've costed on pages 6, 7, and 8 of your handout. Basically, the space that is still vacant, which is retail, demised as retail JCPenney, is 64,970 square feet. That portion of the building we equalized with the other portion, the other buildings in the Fashion Square Mall, which were department stores. That was Belk and Belk's Men's Store, and that's presented on page 7. The per square foot of improvements for the subject property for that section is $25.71 a square foot. The other 2 department store, Belk's, which is still open, is got improvement assessment of $29.63 a square foot, and the Belk's Men's Store has an assessment of $25.80 a square foot. So we're well within the range of the other buildings that are in the Fashion Square Mall. The replacement cost new less depreciation for this particular section of the building was $1,670,379. Section 2 of the building is the cost of the 32,140 square feet that was renovated at the county's expense in 2023. It has now got 18,789 square feet of service repair garage for our fire trucks, and also inspection station for our police vehicles, and a forensic area to do forensics for the police on vehicles that they need to do that on. That, as well as office of 13,351 square feet, is completely renovated, and we have a replacement cost new, less depreciation for that section of the building of $3,695,583. When you take those 2 together, the replacement cost new, less depreciation of the entire building is $5,366,000. The remaining value is in the land. We have equalized the land at $40 per square foot in the Route 29 assessing district. There's a copy of our sales on page 9 of your handout, and based on that base rate of $40 a square foot, we made an adjustment for location, an adjustment for size, and an adjustment for corner influence. After all of those adjustments, the land was assessed at $12.96 per square foot. So the total value of the land is $5,741,300. The revised value of the improvements is $5,366,000, and therefore the new assessment should be $11,107,300.
No, you're a double thing.
Yes, thank you. The request for increase is unexpected, and as my rebuttal, I would like to request a withdrawal of this appeal.
Okay.
So we can declare 3 years when the appeal is processed. When the appeal is.
Both
kind of acting at the last moment, this, publicly that, we notified them a little while ago that we were asking for an increase, and, while the economy basically says that appraisal has to be, independent appraisal has to be provided if that's an increase except in maybe two conditions. And one of those conditions is the correction of mistakes and things. So we are, basically asking to increase the assessment because we're correcting information that we found during the appeal. It's up to you to act on that. Make a decision not to make a change, and just confirm the assessment, or make a decision to accept them. The applicant's control.
Is the taxpayer provided notice of the request increase in 14 days or
They will.
there's no
What were the mistakes of fact?
It was we found that the use of the property was no longer their house. It was this service garage use, and the square footage that was used for that was larger than the original lease that was provided.
Yeah.
Basically, some of it was office.
More office.
There was also more office than there had been.
And there was also a portion of the property that had been common area. We had taken as out of common area and used exclusively for ourselves because they wanted to provide confidential access and to the forensic area, and also for the police to be able to certain things. So the building permit that we had was different than the square footage that was leased. And we didn't receive the lease documentation until the appeal was requested.
So I think the assessor's office for providing this copy of the Virginia Code Section 58.1-3379. I think under subpart D of this, I think that the increase is the ability to increase after the appeal is filed is contingent on the provision of notice to the taxpayer not less than 15 days prior to the hearing. So the options are checking, just taking a word, but I think the options are from the assessment or grant to the request to withdraw the appeal. In either case, I think that the number, the assessment number that will change there. But my reading of it is that we could not move forward with the hearing over the taxpayer objection for lack of notice.
The third option would be to reschedule. Just 2 weeks out, some 2 days.
So is there, do you have an election?
It's, we would be withdrawing this appeal if we were to reschedule.
So you don't wish to reschedule the appeal? Okay.
And for the record, the inspection, I apologize, I was not aware of the recent happenings. We reviewed the financial statements, we reviewed the property reports on CoStar. That's as far as the research went. We had communications with the clients when we requested documents, and when the assessor's office requested an inspection, again, we were not aware there was so much going on. Had we have known, we would not have appealed this property, and therefore we request this property.
I'm not to accept them. You get much.
Okay, is there anyone else have a perspective?
So if we accept their withdrawal, what happens next?
Nothing. The value doesn't change.
It stays the same.
It stays at the original assessment,
Yes.
it neither goes up nor down.
Correct.
Okay, is there a motion with respect to the applicant's request for withdrawal?
Nomination to accept the withdrawal applicant.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? All opposed? Okay, the application is withdrawn. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for your time and thank you.
Do you want these documents back?
Sure, it's less for board members.
Okay. So I think we need to keep these,
We'll keep
some, okay.
You don't know what they can do.
The assessment, whatever it says, what you propose to go.
You never know.
Yeah.
We had, we hope that change.
It's the assessment.
And it'll, you know,
That information is settled. Assessment.
Else is going to be in that building.
Exactly.
yeah, definitely any changes.
That is correct.
Warehouse.
Mr. Miller is the next applicant, is the next three.
You ready? I'm sorry.
Hold on just a second. So, he's got all three of them, and we've provided, information that is common to all three. He's gonna make a presentation. On the information individually for you. You know, we did, you know, I did about. All of this starts in tab number 6. The running tab number 6 is the keywords section. And then after each tab, that's where the individual. It's first. Separate, yeah. Kind of a peach color. And the first parcel starts.
Okay.
It's involved property, but at least.
Sorry, could I swear you in?
Yeah.
Anyone who's gonna be putting testimony today, can you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony, both oral and documentary, which you are about to give, will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Thank you. All right, the applicant has the floor. Okay.
This involves properties that I leased from RWSA in the Buck Mountain area, at least since the early 1980s. And in 2012, they were put in, or 2010, they were put into land use, and they've been in land use until this past year. They were taken out of land use by the assessor's office. That's just history. I'm not disputing whether that was right or wrong. That's in the place here. What we're talking about now is what is the fair market value of these properties? Because my tax is based on 15% of the fair market value. Okay. So there's been some changes just recently in the assessment, and I had to add some documents to the packet that you already have. And there's a couple that this doesn't have. I'm adding, most of the rest of those are things that, you know, they are.
Yeah, I give them that.
I gave him a letter that you sent in addition to the packet. This is just a better copy of what you've seen.
Okay.
Now, I originally, basically, this is a unique property. There are several other properties that have the same issue in the Buck Mountain watershed. And the problem is that a lot of these properties are landlocked. There's no access to a public road. RWSA acquired these under the threat of condemnation, and they didn't need access because they had access to all of these properties from Buck Mountain Road. So they never asked for any right of ways. They never asked for any development rights when they took partial properties. So what we have are properties now that are landlocked. And in 2012, they became further landlocked when RWSA had an easement put on them in compensation for supposed environmental damage in the building of the Ragged Mountain Reservoir. So if you, in the packet I just gave you, this is, I think, near the bottom, it's a map. This map is attached to the deeded easement. This easement prevents any disturbance of the land surface in perpetuity. And it's only with the consent of the Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of Environmental Quality that any changes to this can happen. So there's no way somebody can put a right of way in through this, and there's no way they can go across adjacent properties for the reasons I explained in the packet that was given to you much earlier. So what we have is a property that's landlocked. We have no data, and I don't believe the assessor's office has any data on on the sale of landlocked properties and how that affects the fair market value. So I initially attempted a cost income-based approach to coming up with a value for this property. I'm not an accountant, and I don't expect anyone to really buy off on what I've done, but that was presented in the original package. That comes out with a very low number because they're only leasing it basically what they would lease it to a hunt club or somebody. So in the meantime, the assessment has been dropped twice since I originally talked to the assessor's office about it. Most recently, that was in just a week or two ago. And when it was dropped, the way in which it was assessed changed radically. Look for this page that I recently gave you, and you'll see how it's priced now. This is, you'll see the same information as a packet that Peter did. And what we can see here is that both parts of this parcel are now assessed with a base rate of $15,375. In the past, if you come down to the second one, in the past, for all the years I've been leasing it, and I can document that back as far as 2017, it's been the packet, the parcel or the type of acreage and the corresponding base rate has always been RS2 and RS3, which is not common for properties in that area. There's another, this is a summary of a bunch of properties. This is one of the things I just gave you in that area. And you can see what the diversity is of properties being classified as R1, or RS1, RS2, or RS3. Now, when this was reclassified as RS1, it basically, basically what I was asking was for an adjustment because it's landlocked. And the other thing I originally talked to John Stevens about was an adjustment because of the easement itself devaluing the land. He did not agree that it devalued the land, and I couldn't find any legal basis for countering that at that time. So if we look at the effect of the upgrade to RS1 from RS1 and 2, we see that increased the value to $635,000 from what was $496,000. Now then, of course, they finally applied the adjustments for the lack of access and the restrictions of the easement itself, and that brought it back down to $287,000. But my belief is that there was no justification for bumping them up to RS1 and from RS2 and 3 in the first place. They should have left it at that, then applied the new adjustments. And the second, another issue was that adjustment for access, which is a 40% discount. In other words, it's a 0.6 multiplier. Is too large. It should be based on what the appraiser I hired to look into this said. It should be 0.438. Now there's you'll have a copy in the packet that you previously received that included the report by Will Sanford, the appraiser. And that's the only data I've seen from anybody anywhere on the effect of the sale of a landlocked parcel. So unless Peter has something, which at this point he hasn't, I think that needs to be reduced to 0.438, which would bring us down to that third box down there, which would be 210. And that was still at RS1. If you accept that it should still be at RS2 and RS3, then you come to the last box, and that uses the original RS2 classifications and the associated 2025 base rates, and my appraiser's opinion as to the devaluation due to being landlocked, and that brings you down to 144,000 in the bottom. And now this is the document that I just gave you. There's some, yeah, okay. There's some similar things in the past. If I could start all over again, knowing what I know now was going to change, I would have been just much less junk in that packet. And I had no assurance that anybody was going to buy off of this actually being landlocked. So there's a lot of junk in there to prove that it is landlocked, and the boundaries are where my appraiser said they are and where I know they are. Now, the other problem, big problem, is that these this RS1 classification is used for properties that are associated with home sites, and it's also being used for properties that are not associated with home sites. And, you know, realtors always say it's a location, location, location. Well, the most important thing is how close is this property to your home? If it's part of the parcel, all right, make it an RS1. If it's a quarter mile down the street that you own this other property, otherwise equivalent, then maybe it should just be an RS3. As I was intending to put it to you, if consider somebody has $500,000 to spend in free Union area on a home, at a home site. if they've got $500,000 and they can get a 2-acre home site and say 11-acre residual acres surrounding it, all is one parcel. Would they buy that? Or would they buy just the home site if there was a vacant, or if there was a home site, 2-acre home site, and then go a quarter mile or so down the street and buy a separate parcel for the same price? No. The fact that that residual acreage is next to the home site makes it much more valuable than a separate parcel down the road that has no home site. But yet, that's the way it's being done now. It's categorized RS1, whether it's part of the home site where you live, or whether it's a separate parcel with no building rights whatsoever down the road. So I don't think there's any justification for this being assessed the same. It should be RS2, or probably more correctly RS3. Now, there, I've got topo maps from the GIS system that let you compare. I have one copy of these, but you can compare another parcel in the area, and this one happens to be a parcel that's owned by RSA, with the parcel that I lease, or the major parcel that I lease. The two smaller parcels I'm less concerned about. So this is RS3. This is now, this is RS3. This is now just RS1. And, you know, if you look at those and pass it along and see if you see any justification for the difference between the two. Each one has a copy of mine on the bottom, and the one on the top is each example. So I don't know if you all need to see every single one of them.
No, they're not all the same.
Yeah, but it's different parcels, but they we'll just give you an example of the discrepancy. And some of these might be partially RS1 and partially RS2. One of the first ones I sent you was all RS3, and in fact, it's the most similar in topography to the one that I lease. So, for what's worth, here they are. So what I'm asking is for the major parcel, the 59-acre parcel, which is the page that I've directed you to first, that it be reduced to the amount shown in the bottom front spreadsheets. So if you agree that with my assessor that the revaluation of a landlocked parcel should be used multiplier of 4.38, and if you agree that they should have been, the parcel should have stayed as RS1 and RS2 and RS3, then that's the bottom one that you should choose. Now, I believe Peter is thinking that they're going to standardize the way that they treated all the Buck Mountain properties, the RWSA properties, and I've looked and see that hasn't entirely been done yet, and I talked to him about that, and I know maybe that's a work in progress. But the parcel right across the street from where I live, which is about the same size as mine, and appears to have been adjusted by Peter in recognition of access, is still rated RS2. And it's not so important. I know Peter would like to have a standard way of treating the Buck Mountain properties that are leased from RWSA, but they're not all the same. Some have easements on them but don't have access blocked. Others, like mine, have access blocked, plus they have easements on them. But the one across the street from where I live, for example, it has a large easement on it, but yet there is still access through RWSA property, through other RWSA parcels to it that are not blocked. So that they can't really all be treated the same. They have to be treated individually. I mean, there's, you know, there's an issue of fairness, and then there's the issue of, well, what is really the fair market value? If it's blocked and you can't get through with a road without going through the Corps of Engineers and the Department of Environmental Quality, that's pretty well locked up. Anybody have any questions so far?
None. Hopefully. Marty, more houses can be built on R3 than R1.
Well, let me explain. I asked Peter,
It's not the same, what is it?
Please explain. When we since the site,
Yeah, there's 2 acres.
and RS is residual. So we have 4 different zones for residual, starting with RS1 is the highest. And then RS2, 3, 4. We used to have 5 and 6. The reason we use something different than RS1 is in specific situations. One of those has been to adjust for size on a parcel. So if a parcel is 20 acres, we might just use RS1. If it's 80 acres, we might use part RS1, if it's 2, maybe part RS3, depending on how large it gets. And it would be a size adjustment basically. In some cases, we did it that way. In some cases, we did RS1 and we did a percentage size adjustment. So we're trying to get correct those back to all being done the same way. Another way we would break it down is if a portion of the land was in steep slope. You say 10 acres of this parcel is steep slope. We want to differentiate that as 2 as a second adjusted for steep slope, or we floodplain or something like that. So there are different reasons why we would break it down and not just use the RS1, and those are the main reasons.
So this land is land. It means made, but I didn't get in.
So it's landlocked, and it's owned by the same owner as the parcels that are locking it. So to me, there's no legal limits to the access to these parcels.
How many parcels do you?
I agree, but let me correct, there is a legal limit. I mean, you can buy a right of way from a neighboring landowner. You can't buy a right of way from RWSA because of the easement that's been put in place at their request. Walkthrough.
Yeah, let's just say 100 acres.
You can't disturb the surface. You can't build any sort of road or cause a road to be. No, but who is going to buy a parcel? Remember, we're talking about fair market value. Who is going to buy a parcel where they can't put a driveway into it or a road into it? Yeah, you can drive over it. But if you drive over it to the extent that you've damaged the surface, then you violated the easement.
I don't think that's.
Well, the easement,
You're saying easement, are you talking about conservation
it
easement?
is like a conservation easement, but it's called a restrictive easement. And the terms of that restrictive easement are in your package.
Because if it was a conservation easement, it would automatically qualify for land use, correct?
Yes, this is.
Yes, they put in the easement to compensate for flooding.
Yes.
Other streams.
Yeah. The terms of the easement were in the package that you did. I have a copy here.
Yeah, now you look at that, Peter, question, if I understand this right, the parcels were previously RS2 and RS3.
That's
And now they have changed to RS1.
That is correct. But also the adjustments that we're using have changed.
Right. But let's just look at the RS2 and 3-1.
Correct.
Why did they change?
Because as we're looking at it, we're now making those adjustments that were reflected in using the RS2 and 3 in the adjustments that we're making to RS1. So you know, we are making access adjustment, we're making the temporal adjustment, we're making size adjustment, so process.
So previously, your RS2 and RS3
Represented some-
categorizations did not have access and restriction adjustments.
or they were different.
No, you were not aware. As far as I can tell, you were not aware that there was any restrictive easements.
But we're unaware of the restricted easement. Yeah, we were aware of top.
Yes,
So you had an adjustment not for access, but or for access, but not for restrictions.
Access and for tempo, not for restrictions.
if you look at these charts, you notice I've separated the two sections. One I call typical adjustments. Those maybe are not identical to what he had before, but they're the same sort of adjustments that were had before. The numbers have changed a little bit. And then I subtotaled that, and that gave you basically the value in the assessor's eyes, the value that it would be if there was no restricted easement. Okay, and so that value is $635,000. And then you apply the adjustments for the restricted easements, and it brings it down a great deal. But note that that value of $635,000 is about $130,000. Well, the value was $496,000 before this all started. At the first of January 1st, that was the value, $496,000. And so the value, when he changed it from RS1 to RS2, the value immediately went up to $635,000. Okay. Then he applied the restrictive easements. So in other words, if no restrictive easements were even an issue here, changing that to RS1 and RS2 would have raised the value by 28%, I think I calculated.
Anything further?
All right. This is a study that was done in 2012. And then these foundations are supposed to show a relationship surrounding the parcels. So that you should reduce it to access. Because only the theory behind this adjustment is that you only have that number of people. I don't agree with that necessarily. Yeah, if you only look at what's provided just for one sample. Number one, which actually wasn't even a sale, it was an analysis of the offer for a landlocked parcel made by an adjacent property owner, which was not accepted. So this is some of the information that this is based on, it's the offer that was accepted. It is a 110 acre parcel, and it's tax map 113-9. I haven't taken. And, you know, so like I said, this was a study done in 2012. This parcel sold in 2021 for $450,000. So currently, our assessment reflects a minus 40% access adjustment, which is just the same as we're using on these parcels. The property is assessed at $290,000. Make sure I'm giving it correct, $290,700. it sold in 2021. So we're talking about 9 years after the study was made, for $450,000, or almost like 40% more, almost double. I guess that's 80%. Than the assessment based on a 40%. So obviously, a larger reduction in value would not be warranted because we're already below the assessment with a 40% reduction. So I feel that some of that you basing these access adjustments on the study, the information the study based the access adjustment on aren't necessarily valid or useful. Maybe they were in 2012. It's very difficult to, one of the things that appraisers do, and that they're taught to do is paired sales analysis. So these two parcels sold, and the difference between the only single difference between these two parcels is this one thing. So obviously the difference in what they sold for is what we should adjust that one. So, and then you provide, if you can, you provide one difference. And there's a sales and you say, this is support for that adjustment. In reality, there's never one thing different between two sales. Even if they're physically the same, the buyers and sellers are going to be different. There's going to be lots of other differences. So it's really difficult to say absolutely that this is the reason or the amount that we should adjust based on this item. It's a normal thing for an appraiser to do, and we have to base our adjustments on something, but it's absolutely not definitive. So I feel that while this study is fine, absolutely basing an adjustment for access on this study, absolutely at 60%, or I think it was actually 50 minus 56.7% or something like that, is really problematic. We do address access on this property. We reduce it by 42%, which is a pretty good reduction. We also address the two of these three factors. We address the restrictions due to this easement that was put in, these restrictive covenants that were put on these properties on two of the three. And we also adjust their size. We also address their topography. We feel that if they were ever willing to sell these, which RWSA is probably never going to sell these for a reason, that they would be able to get the value that we have on them. And we do not have, one of the important parts is that we do not have a home site on any of these parcels because we don't consider any of them building. So, there's a question obviously between should we use RS1, 2, or 3. I believe RS1 is appropriate based on the adjustments that we put on these parcels. The fact that we don't use HS1, a home site, is important because we're not saying that anybody can build a house on these because they legally cannot. So I believe we've addressed all of those issues. And then we come down to that's the underlying exempt parcels owned by RWSA. These sold parcels are then assessed at 15% based on standard. That's pretty much ours.
I have a question about the change between RS1, RS2, RS3. Is there clear criteria of what constitutes each category, or is it just, well, we kind of think this one's, this part is RS1, and you know what I'm.
Unfortunately, it's a little more touchy-feely than definitive. So there are no set guidelines for whether to use RS2.
So I guess the question in my mind is, if it was already categorized as RS3, then you looked at it and said, well, we're going to move it up to RS1, but then we're going to put all these discounts on it. Why not put the discounts on as RS3 if it was already RS3?
So because what we want to do at this point, and we're going to do this for all of these related properties owned by RWSA, is to correct the value on these
3 parcels, which we believe we have done now. And in order for them to be correct and appropriate, we should be using RS1 and then adjusting them for these differences.
Seems like, so that's, you do RS1 everywhere and then do adjustments
Yes.
across the can.
There are reasons why we could use those other ones, but none of those reasons apply to these parcels. And then
What are the reasons?
we're gonna go. Some of those separations due to floodplain, critical slope and stuff like that. There could be reason, or there are reasons why we use those in those cases.
Also just do RS1 and quantify that area.
We could do that. See that there are multiple choices in every one of these options. And that's what we're trying to narrow by 9 appraisers that do this work down to all of them using these same things. And this, not just the 9, but the ones that came before that said a lot of these places passed.
I'd like to point out that I'm aware of those sales that you were talking about with regard to one of the examples that my appraiser used. Because I looked those up too, and those sales were part of a larger, more complicated transaction. As I recall, I didn't save all the documents. So it's not as simple as, well, this sold for a whole bunch of money later on. The point is that at that point in time, that was what human nature was, and we don't think that's probably changed that much, that you're not going to get as much money for something that's landlocked as something that is. Now, I wish I had more data than my appraiser had. Really had very limited data, but that's data, that's something. And the 40% reduction that Peter's using is no more than a guess. And I'd also like to remind you again that setting aside the adjustments that were put in place because of the restricted easement, access and the reduction in value, changing to a RS1 immediately moved the value of the property from $496,000 to $635,000. And that happened simply because we changed the category to RS1. The other adjustments were not much different than the previous adjustments.
For the 2024, at the end of the day, RS2 and 3, any adjustments you got to add of these two cases.
Looking for 2024.
Why do you accept officers until it's disproved? So are you asking us to change the RS3? You're arguing that the RS3 categorization was more appropriate?
Yes,
What's the basis for that? Why do you?
similar to other parcels that I've let you look at.
The other
and the
parcels
fact that-
might have different adjustments applied.
Well, you can see the values on there and get I don't have a card for each of those other parcels, but you can see the values and see that they're, not too much different.
What the appraiser's office just explained is that there's different combinations of RS classifications, if that's the adjustment factors. That varies among appraisers, and then they're trying to get it in alignment.
Right. Well, I don't think a change that increases the value of the property by 28% is warranted. I mean, the only difference is that I came in for a BOE hearing. Nothing else has changed with that property.
No, what changed is that you went into a process with the appraiser's office whereby they gave it a closer review.
They haven't set foot on the property. They haven't got any place to be. They just looked at the same things you guys.
They produced us the same type of records that you produce, so if you don't think that constitutes a closer review or more focused review, then where that leaves us. Okay, gathering the information and making an analysis of the property is what you did, what you're asking us to do, and it's what they did, triggered by your appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Did you request an in-person review of the property?
No,
Is there any information that would have been helpful for for determining of this outcome to have gathered with an in-person view?
excuse me.
Why should they have looked at why did you want them to come and look at the?
Oh, I did. I'm just saying, I don't think it was much more of a review in terms of the justification for changing from RS2 and 3 to RS1. You can see the other properties that, this list of properties here that have a wide, range of different RS numbers. And you can see the, each of these, well, I have topo maps for the ones that are marked topo. And they're here for you to see. And there's no apparent difference. In particular, there were two long sheets, if they're there. All those have.
So we actually can't do it based on no apparent difference. It's as likely that it should be RS3 as RS1.
Okay, well, here's a comparison you can look at. Here's, this is a property that's in the same area, owned by RWSA. It's leased. And it is RS3. Here's the one I lease, RS1. So they are very similar. The properties are very similar, except for their outlook. It's just a bit different.
Mr. Miller, what do you, not that this has anything to do with, what do you use the property?
Basically, now I use it to just control access to people who carry guns. I allow certain people to hunt there, but there are people that hunt illegally, including one person that hunts drunk. And I need to legally be able to throw them off the property.
So how does those people or you access the property?
They walk through.
Is there like a parking area or something?
No, there's no parking there. They just walk through, they trespass and go to properties to get there. I originally rented it simply to hike there and then for my kids to use. And my kids are grown and don't live here anymore. And I have granddaughters now instead of grandsons, and they're not quite so interested in hiking. So that's the main reason. RWSA has never been able to lease those properties. I've had people come in on four-wheelers in the early days. I prevented that from happening. I had people come in with and guns. That's why I lease it.
We mentioned earlier that these restriction on the custodians of the surface. We were talking about the document provided. Declaration of restrictions affecting property.
Yes.
So that document on page 3 specifically allows for the improvements for site access, right?
Right.
Yes.
Declaration of restrictions. Preserved in perpetuity in its natural state, prohibiting the following activities.
So part 2 says notwithstanding the foregoing general prohibition, the following activities are not restricted. It existed there of in-stream structures and improvements for site access, right?
Yes.
And then on subpart B, there's wildlife management structures, observation decks, livestock crossing, equipment fords, and unpaved foot bicycle and pedestrian trails.
Yeah, equipment for
So all those things would facilitate access, including vehicular access for equipment fords and improvements for site access.
right. Yeah, not the building on the road or drive.
Well, no, that's not what it says. It says improvements for site access, which would allow for provided it's in service of activities reasonably necessary for renovation of the reservation area.
Right, but who's gonna buy a property that they can't
I don't know who might buy it, probably the same person who might lease it, but it's not correct to say that you can't build a road or any improvement to facilitate access. It says
That's sure. Everyone interprets that way.
Which part do you think is supportive of no roads?
In particular, which part of, that's item B, construction placement. Side crossings. Which wards, utilities. Unpaved, foot, bicycle, equestrian trails, providing such structures permit the natural movement of water. Yeah, and then, so you need to go back and. But prohibited is the destruction of natural vegetation, natural contours of land. That's something you do. It's equipment means like tractors or something, or cars. That need a road. Construction of existing structures or fills. Fills is something that they will do a road.
So do you see the part that says notwithstanding the foregoing?
Yes.
So that means no matter what happened before, the following activities are not restricted. Regardless of the general prohibition, these specific things are approved.
Okay, so you see that as permitting a road to be built through there.
I see there's permitting improvements for site access.
Side access could be just foot access or equestrian access.
You. It's quite one of the questions is, who would buy it if you couldn't do it now? But you're not assessing it as if there was a building site.
There you go.
So one of the things we did was we had location adjustments, positive location adjustments. Plus 10%. We removed that as part of the. Ones that may have RS 203, so the 80% access adjustment. This person before we changed that to 60% based on this review. And I think kind of this conversation about what is allowed in there and what's not allowed in there, and the kind of difficulty in determining exactly what that means adds to the complexity of what you're talking about. You know, you said that, you know, basically like minus 40% is just a guess. I mean, minus 57% is not just a guess, is my question. So, you know, you can say that I'm basing this on this information. It's absolutely correct, but I contest that's not. But to get back to your question, we had a 75% tempo adjustment. I don't think that changed. Yeah, 75, still 75%. So what we've done differently is we've added a restriction adjustment. We have access adjustment. Location these parcels. So we brought those in. At the same time, we consolidated into RS1, which is a higher value start from. I'm absolutely not denying that. But I believe that it's the right place to be, and then the other adjustments are correct as they are. The other parcels that are not under appeal here still might, you know, actually some of those have home sites because they may be buildable homes or buildable sites. Some of them have RS1s, they have RS2s, so it's going to be a mixture. So depending on, I'm just looking at this so there's a whole array of ones that have use on this, and that would be for different reasons. And if we review those and we're going to do this summer, we're going to make sure they all match the same way we're doing this. It doesn't mean they're going to have exactly the same.
Only some of those are part of the SA parcels. Many of them are not. Yeah.
So what was the assessment?
Oh, the assessment was okay, which parcel?
29, 41, 42.
Future, I understand. There was an appeal. There was an adjustment to RS1, but these, at least, 49A3 and 49A2 have both been reduced from their 2024 assessment. What the applicant is requesting is basically a farther reduction based on reverting some of the changes, but not others.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand that. In 2024, the assessment was $425,000 of exempt land. And now it's been reduced to 287,000.
As a result of the restrictions that had not been considered and the access, which had not been considered in the past. That's why it's been reduced.
So I can,
He was saying that it's not correct, that those were considered based on the way, you didn't break them out. You did not break them out like individually, like you have now. You went up to R1 from R2 or 3.
for those prior years, we had used the criteria throughout.
And that included these restriction things.
Yeah, it didn't have a restriction adjustment in the prior year, and it didn't have as large adjustments on access.
The assessment has gone down.
Yes,
Considerably
it
this
has,
year.
it has gone down. So I'll explain that. So Mr. Miller kind of at the very beginning mentioned regulations. So and these were not contested in prior years because the taxes were paid on that $405,000 on this parcel. They were in the land use program. And then we finally came to the determination that these parcels cannot be under form school, we specifically, and these trees could never be cut. So and without RWSA's allowing it to happen, and actually the restrictions that you see here would never allow it to happen. So we removed them from the land use program. That's when the market value of these became issues. They were being assessed in.
But consider this easement similar to like conservation easement.
I do not. It's not on the entire parcel. It's just on these restricted areas. So,
I'd like to point out something.
Just restricted areas.
land use, conservation easement is on the entire parcel. Not on just the use of these little, these specific areas for that list that you were looking at. It restricts all development, the entire parcel. And changes. They're a different animal. This does not qualify under.
I'd like to clear it.
Exactly. Use of the property is conservation is.
Yeah,
If it wasn't a lease, he's paying taxes, are they?
they're under taxes. It's a tax exempt. So, you know, properties like Mr. Miller's.
They tie your rent based on the assessment values of the.
No, my rent is based on what their consultant determined was fair market. And that of course was based on taxable parcels that people were renting, which meant people were paying taxes. The owner paid the taxes. See, now I'm paying fair market rental. Plus, I'm also paying 15% of the fair market taxes. So, but I do want to point out that this restricted easement and the lack of access, I don't believe had ever been considered before I brought it to Peter's and John's attention. Back early in the year. I don't think this was ever considered.
I'll agree that had not been.
But you're not saying they didn't consider it, yeah.
Oh, yes, no, they finally considered it as of May 23rd. May 23rd is when they made the decision, or at least when they documented the decision to consider this. And that's why in this analysis here, I'm showing it separate. What it would have been had they changed it to RS1 and this was not there. And then when they realized it was, then they brought it down, way down. But changing to RS1 brought it way up. So they gave me with one hand, but they were taking away with the other hand, so to speak.
I mean, opinions of reducing it within the one, within the so,
Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to say, you know, in the end, we are considering that, those restrictions for the value that's under it. So yes, we went through several gyrations and there was lots of confusion with this appeal in the first place. It all started with kind of an appeal of the land use qualification, evolved into an appeal of the value. We did not handle it very well at the beginning, and we regrouped and I believe, did a really good job of this parcel in the end. But I just want to comment on conservation easement. Say this was a conservation easement. A conservation easement has to be assessed as land use values only if it would have qualified for land use at the time it was put under that easement. Otherwise, it is assessed at a reduced value to represent the loss in value given away. And we have determined in studying my office that reduction in value is 50%. 50% is where we got the 50% we're using on these parcels for the restricted areas. So we tied that together. And I neglected to say that earlier. That's the what that's what.
And I don't see that 50% as they're using it. I have no problem with that. I think that's proper. It's in keeping with the spirit of the law anyway. Even though it's not actually a conservation easement. They had similar packets or spreadsheet analysis show for two smaller parcels if we need to look at those. It really depends to a large extent what, I mean, I know I was only supposed to have 2 minutes in is there anything else we need to discuss about the major parcel before we move further?
It's all the same. It's just different.
Yeah, these parcels were originally, there was an issue of the acreage, and Peter and I have come to agreement on that. He was not aware that I was only leasing part of one of these parcels. That's a minor thing, and he's already given me the sheet. It shows the corrected assessment.
The access adjustment you have, you've got it at 40%. He's saying 56-ish percent. That's related to, that's related to access from a public way. Not
that's typically
discussion
what you use
about
that.
getting just right of way through
That is correct.
conservation.
Yes.
Okay.
We don't normally.
The landlocked.
We don't normally use a minus 40% on a parcel that just has to drive through somebody else's parcel to get to, but it can drive through the other parcel. We're typically minus 10%. So this is a much higher reduction for all of those issues. And being able to identify exactly how much that should be is very difficult. How much each aspect of that, restriction. It's just a very difficult thing.
the important thing to remember though is what we're talking about is fair market value, and that's what a knowledgeable buyer is gonna pay for a piece of property. There was a knowledgeable buyer buy, a several $100,000 piece of property when it has no deeded access, no deeded right of way. I mean, who does it? Not a knowledgeable buyer.
I mean, in this case, the market, there's land owned by the same person next to a building. If you put it on the market, you're gonna deed access to it.
Right, but that hasn't happened yet. As soon as that happens,
Not the same
it's
place.
a different, yeah, but it hasn't happened. As soon as that happens, as soon as there's a deeded access to this parcel, then by all rights, it's gonna change the assessment. Yet there is no deeded access, and it would be difficult to get. Because,
I think these allow for that. I think the assessor's office.
They will have 40%, you want 50 some odd percent.
Yes.
So that's.
and
It's taking us a while to get to that.
And the base rate is a big disagreement that, I mean, maybe the day will come when you're doing everything that way, when you're starting with RS1 and there is no RS2 and RS3. But I don't see that happening in the near future. In the meantime, I'm getting burned.
Mr. Mayor, you don't need any more general information, maybe it's teaching.
Yeah, I think I understand generally, the points of dispute. Does anybody need anything further? Otherwise, I think proceed.
Okay, if I proceed, are you waiting for me to say something about the other two parcels?
If there's any arguments that you would like to make that are specific to the other two parcels,
Only that this is what I think you need to consider, depending on how you decide about this RS2 and RS3. These were, this is the one that is on the map is to the far west, right here. And the second one I'll give you is this parcel right here, which actually has no easement in it. So the first one I'm going to give you is the one on the left.
This one, it says 26.
Yeah, on this map it is 26, yes.
So if you look at the grass map up here, the restrictions cover mostly on over here, it covers that also part.
But there's no restrictions on this one. This is the one that he owns only about half of.
Lease.
Lease is only half. Thanks. Oh.
What I've done here is just giving you different valuations depending on what you decide about RS1, RS2, RS3, and then what you decide about the reduction for access, whether it should be what Peter is advocating 40% off, and what I'm advocating is 56% off or so. So this gives you the numbers depending on what you decide about this.
When you write recent adjustments, you mean in the last month?
Excuse me?
You say recent adjustments, this is what you mean.
Yes, right. Since, yes, within the last month, yeah, since May 23rd. And that, I'll give you the second. This is the one where I just released half of it. Peter was just explaining. It's maybe a little bit simpler, but still just a question: is it RS1, RS2, and we're talking about what sort of reduction we're talking about for access.
Two days, do something, can you unwind? I will be almost 50,000 parcels that we substitute in almost all of our time. Making sure that our taxable properties, the ones that people are gonna pay taxes on, certainly
are at properly assessed. And then we have the exempt parcels, which we do not spend. So once these parcels got set up about 20 years ago, RS2 and RS3, we didn't pay a whole lot. But even the leasehold owners didn't care because those properties, those valued money was there. Only now that anybody cares about the laws of these properties. So saying that, being treated wrongly because of prior years we do something different as opposed to this year, I don't think it's appropriate. I think we've gotten it correct on all three of these parcels. We, like I said, are going to expand and do all the rest of the affected parcels. But those parcels are going to have both the positives and the negatives that are going to apply to these three parcels. They're also going to have the positives that apply to them. So overall,
These are the RS,
these are
RSW.
RWSA parcels. Yes, that is correct.
But are you gonna change non-RS?
Only if there are any that it applies to. Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of them out there that are RS2, RS3, or combinations of either of those.
That is correct.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, does the appraisal office want to comment on specific, partial specific arguments or than what the?
Yeah, nothing more to add, except that we just don't have the constraint. Just another one person.
No, then that's.
Okay. Is there any further?
You did get the restrictions on all 2.58 acres, even though it's not 2.58.
No, did I make a mistake? Look at that.
I'm reading that wrong. The small number 26 on the map.
Yeah, you.
I mean, I'm saying y'all
Yes, you are correct.
don't, didn't. You applied that restriction across the entire 2.58 acres versus
That was it. That is, yeah.
1 point.
For that. Right. Yes, so that changes. Yeah.
From that. You applied.
I applied.
Yeah, all of them.
I'm looking for
Big parcel you broke it out.
Broken out in small parcels.
and so which
Also, it's number 26, is that A1?
It's 29,
It's the little finger.
2945.
so that one is. This one. Purchase only to 1.09.
I apparently did not complete. Yeah, I just reinforce one thing I've been saying though, and may have been lost in everything. And that is that the value of residual acreage is not associated with a house site, but it's otherwise equal to residual acreage that is associated with that house site. it's just, it can't be the same. I mean, think about the person who's buying something. That residual acreage is gonna mean a lot more to them, it's gonna be a lot more value if it's at their house site as opposed to down the road somewhere. So to use that same residual value for otherwise equivalent pieces of property doesn't make sense to me.
Are you saying it's because it changed to RS1?
Well, I'm saying,
The RS1 doesn't necessarily mean it's residual to a house site.
Mean it's close to, or anything like that. Yeah, that's not part of the idea.
yeah, just imagine you're out looking for a piece of property. You want extra acreage? And if you want extra acreage, wouldn't it be nice if it was next to your house as opposed to somewhere else? It's just to start off with the same underlying value, the same base value, just doesn't make sense to me. Two completely different situations.
Any further questions?
Meeting where we're taking evidence and testimony. Deliberation. Reading the polls, taking the 5 minutes.
Anybody got one piece again? I'll just. I'll just leave them.
No, I have a conservation. Well,
I didn't
But
realize,
it's a land
I didn't realize what
my conservation is, I'm in land use.
So I didn't realize, I thought it automatically went to land use, but they had to qualify for land use at the time, which means you have to have at least 20 acres.
Oh, it
Forestry
qualified.
Or 5 acres.
It was under land use before I
Okay.
put it in.
Alright.
So that's
Well,
what
it's conservation, isn't it? You can reduce your taxes.
Oh,
Something like by 50%.
oh, way more than that, about 80%.
Well, like I was in land use, so it was taxed at land use.
So it didn't change.
So it didn't change, but I locked it in for at least no matter what. Future maintenance was a total of 126, but if we did that conservation easement development, I kept 60 of them. Contributed to the tax of the county. Lots.
Our teachers.
About lost my shirt to them. They stopped me. My wife in 07. So, and then the world ended in a way. So the bank about the bank almost got it back.
Yeah.
You used to be on it.
I went on that after I did my
So I've
stuff.
been talking to Pete on farm bureau, and I don't want to be on it, but we want to get.
Thank you for
There
coming in.
was somebody on there one point when I was on.
Yeah.
Don't watch it.
Yes. There
Well,
was some hanky went on out.
Dude,
there. I'd be
I
pretty-
fought like a dog for some of the stuff. Like they wanted to restrict the size of the houses. It's like you hear from, historic preservation, all this shit.
You can within reason, but it can't be too small.
They were, yeah, I know. I'm like, you're talking, these average lots are like 60 acres or more. And you're telling somebody they can look at 2,500 square feet. Insane. No, we ended up, I was losing, so I negotiated something where it's like you start 7,500 square feet on a base of 40 acres. And then for every 10 acres, you get another 5%. But I mean,
That's pretty reasonable.
my comment to him was. My house. Let me.
Okay, the time to deliberate. Application. Three. Two. We take these in order, or is there a general agreement on the, arguments applicable to all?
One, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we can consider these as one, considering that's largely how they were presented. Be substantially similar, if not identical.
Let me mention one thing that's,
You can't take any further input.
okay, that's all. I'll work it out with Peter.
So beginning, just as a recap, there was an appeal of this relating to the status of the tax exemption. Through the land use program that led into an appeal of the assessment value. One and I think two subsequent reassessments by the assessor's office, and that led to values that were reflected on the Nathan River home plans now to Mr. Miller. And some of those values now are I feel first to just kind of give my overview or my assessment of the evidence submitted. I thought that the receiving an appraisal from a licensed commercial appraiser was helpful. We don't always get something that definite. I did not find the use of a 2012 study to be particularly compelling, especially when measured against what the appraiser's office is doing, which is adjusting those figures year to year. Some paired sales rejected or sort of just devalued based on being a year old or 2 years old. So it's sort of hard to accept that 13-year-old analysis should hold more weight in my mind to overcome the presumption of correctness for the assessor's office. The value reduction, the lack of access. Yeah, the RS1 versus RS3 contention. I think on that one, I think either of those classifications could be correct. It just sort of depends on how the other pieces are allocated. We're challenging a number, a final number here, and the final number is high or low or dead on, and RS1 or RS3 classification could be in service of a larger argument about the number being too high or too low or dead on. But in light of the other adjustments made by the assessor's office, I don't find the RS1 reclassification problematic, particularly in light of the explanation I offered for about the past tax classification of the parcel and not being able to say the tax exempt entity. And certainly understand why that would happen and why the adjusting pieces as well. Those are kind of the big arguments that I was listening to, but curious to hear what others think.
I feel like, the assessor's office has done a good job of taking all this information into account and adjusting it, and I don't know that, there's been any reason to assume that what they have come up with finally is not correct.
Anything further? Okay, is there a motion relating to, application number 3, parcel ID 29-4983?
Make a motion that we affirm the assessment on. Whatever these numbers are.
Application number 3.
Yeah, number 3, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay, to modify the motion, that's all. Is there a second in favor of the modified motion to approve application numbers 2, 3, and 4? A second? Well,
Affirm the current assessment.
Yeah, to affirm the current assessment. In response to application numbers 2, 3. Second. Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. The assessor's office's determination as to the value of these three parcels. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for listening. And I apologize for the phone ring. They updated my phone and turning down the volume no longer turns down the volume.
Not a problem.
Go figure.
Mine's the same way.
This makes me crazy.
So Thursday, right?
Thursday at 10:40 is the first hearing.
10:40.
Correct.
Okay.
And the next one up.
How many do we have?
There are 4.
We already expect, the first 2 under the same for. Give her that. Third out, 964 LLC, have never appeared before in person, so. I attended.
Time is the 4th one scheduled for.
I think you're all finished with me. Peter, well, thank you for updating me before this all started. Appreciate it.
Motion to adjourn.
Go on.
Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting? So. Right, thank you. Second.
All in favor?
Aye. All opposed?
Okay, the
219, the position is very good.